often asked what it was like being a woman in STEM. And my answer usually falls on the word fine. It was fine. No big deal. No problem. But I've come to learn that when I use the word fine, it usually means there's more to the story than I care to admit. So I've been walking around telling myself my STEM story to try to get to know it better. My story starts in 1972 on Earth Day, which is my birthday. There was a cultural push in the 1970s towards environmental protection. The Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, and the Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973. The US space program was in full swing. 12 men walked on the moon between 1969 and 1972. Also in 1972, Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment, which guarantees rights regardless of sex. While these achievements were important to the way that I experienced the world, the thing that kept coming to my mind when I thought of the 70s was the song and the video. It was a special on TV called Free to Be You and Me. And I'm going to play a little clip of it, and some of you might recognize it depending on how old you are. In this land, every girl grows to be her own woman. That really made an impression on me. I fully believed that women could be whatever men could be, including a scientist. I was curious if the message that I received in the 70s matched the reality. In 1972, women held 44% of bachelor's degrees. Of those, the majority were in health, professions, foreign languages, and education. And the least were in architecture, business, and engineering. Now, through my childhood, I watched my mother be a fierce advocate for young women. And my father spent hours with me on the weekends, tromping through the woods, reading National Geographics, and watching Nova. So going forward to the 80s brought increased understanding of genetics and the medical advancements that would come along with it. The space shuttle program was in full swing, and in 1983, the Space Shuttle Challenger took the first American woman into space, Dr. Sally Ride. So meanwhile, I was fascinated with anything that had to do with nature or science, so long as I could be moving around while learning it, for sure. So that takes us to 1988. After a miserable sophomore year, I found myself in the classroom of Dr. Holm, where I discovered my love of chemistry. She had been a chemist in industry and left industry to come and teach high school. I loved the labs in her classroom. I want to highlight, again, that Ms. Holm was in research and development in industry and left to become a high school teacher, as this is going to be a reoccurring theme. By 1988, 52% of women held bachelor's degrees. Still, women had the highest percentage of bachelor's degrees in health, education, and public administration, and the least in computer science, physics, and engineering. In 1990, I graduated from high school and went on to Ohio University to study chemistry. I remember having only one female chemistry professor. Her name was Dr. Eichstadt. Her area of research was chemical education, and she tried to steer me in that direction. I was more interested in biochemistry, however. I worked in 2 labs while I was in undergraduate school. The first one, Dr. Johnson's, was very supportive. I even got a publication for my work in that lab. The other one was in the lab of a molecular biologist that I'm going to call Dr. Too Friendly. He would often show up after hours, places I was hanging out with my friends, and I was very uncomfortable. However, instead of reporting it, I just avoided the lab and him, missing out on my work study pay and also the experiences that I was hoping to get by working in his lab. In any case, I graduated in 1994 and was one of 52% of female bachelor holders. In 1994, 50% of bachelor's degrees in biology were held by women, and 30% of physics degrees went to women. Chemistry would fall somewhere in between. As I look back, it makes sense that I don't remember very many female professors, because if you look at the data, and keep in mind that professors have to have PhDs, there were very low numbers of women with PhDs in STEM. About 10% of physics PhDs at the time went to women, 25% to chemistry, and 38% to biology. So I remember very few female professors because there were very few. Luckily, my first job out of school was working in the lab of Dr. Susan Gilmore. She had her own funding, she ran her own lab, and I was really lucky to be surrounded by her and also female postdocs. Across the hall, there was another woman principal investigator. And so I was just so lucky in my 20s to be surrounded by women doing research in STEM. She gave me a lot of autonomy and responsibility in the lab. And this is when I first started thinking about doing graduate studies. At the time, I resented the number of hours she expected me to work. But looking back, I realized that she had to work so hard to get where she was, and her expecting so much of me was really her way of supporting me because she knew I could do it. Again, she was very supportive and gave me lots of credit for the work I did while I was with her. I ended up starting graduate school at Thomas Jefferson University in pharmacology. And in order to continue working full-time while I was doing my graduate studies, I took a job there at the university in the lab of Dr. James Keene. There, I met Francesca Santini. Dr. Santini was one of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with. Her research was prolific and her knowledge base vast. Still, she didn't have her own lab because in order to have your own lab, you have to have big grant funding. So instead, she worked in the lab of Dr. Keene, which meant that all of her research had his name on it. Meanwhile, I did my master's thesis work in the lab of Dr. Litwack, also a man. And here it gets especially interesting to consider the way that women work behind the scenes to support research and development in STEM. Even though it was Dr. Litwack's lab, I never, ever saw him in the lab, not once. Instead, it was Dr. Noreen Robertson who ran the lab, managed and ran the research, took care of all the postdocs, the graduate students. She did everything. Another woman at Thomas Jefferson that was working behind the scenes was Dr. Karen Dom. She had a PhD in anthropology and had worked at the Smithsonian, and then left and came to Thomas Jefferson University to manage the basic science master's program. So she was an advisor, she was working behind the scenes, and she wasn't doing her own research. Every time she would see me and we would meet, she would say, "You need to get your PhD someplace big, Harvard or Yale." In the end, though, I graduated from Thomas Jefferson in 2000. That same year, just 2 weeks after I defended my thesis, my first daughter was born. Before she was born, my intention was to continue my education and to continue research in biomedical areas. But once she was born, I just forgot. and I ended up leaving science. So one of the most interesting things that I learned while researching for this TED Talk is that I'm not the only one that left science. First, I want to give you some information about the mentors that I had while I was in graduate school. 4 of them, well, one of them was my high school chemistry teacher, ended up either leaving science altogether or moving into more supportive areas. So as I already talked about, Dr. Holm, she left industry to teach high school chemistry. Dr. Francesca Santini, soon after I left Dr. King's lab, she moved to industry, was there for a little bit, and then quit science altogether to study art. Dr. Karen Dahm, I already mentioned her. She had been working at the Smithsonian, left to do more supportive background work. And then Dr. Noreen Robertson, soon after I left Jefferson, moved to Drexel University, where she is the research coordinator. So again, more working behind the scenes in a management capacity. So let's consider an example of neuroscience. So neuroscience is an area where women hold more than half of the PhDs that are awarded. So 55% of PhDs go towards women. But there's a leaky pipeline. You can see that when you look at, so you have all these PhDs, when you look at the large grants that are going towards neuroscience, only 30% of them are going towards women. Also, only 29% of tenure-track professors in neuroscience are women, and only 24% of full professors. According to Holly Else in the journal Nature, 40% of women leave science altogether, or at least go part-time after the birth of their first child. And that's compared to 24% of men when they have their first child, and 23% of women who don't have children. We also see that women are underrepresented in tenure-track faculty positions, and women are less likely to be awarded large grant funding, such as R01 research grants from the NIH. Understand that one must have grant funding in order to run one's own lab in academia. The percent of women in research and development fields varies from region to region in the world. As of 2020, women in North America and Western Europe make up only 33.2% of research and development positions. That's significantly lower than the percentage of women in research and development in Central Asia, Latin America, and the Arab states. So back to 1972, we see that women are better represented in science fields, but the US can do better. So what helps? The AAUW, along with author Angela Zanini, gave me some ideas. Encourage girls, especially Black girls, to see themselves as capable learners of math and science from preschool through high school. Number 3, encourage young women to pursue STEM fields in college and retain them in those studies by holding faculty, the entire faculty, accountable for power dynamic issues that are unhealthy between faculty and students. Number 5, provide mentorship for women and women of color. And number 6, urge STEM employers to recruit, hire, and promote women. Finally, my advice to my young self and to my daughters and to the women that I'm so lucky I get to teach: study science, STEM fields if you love it. Look for university programs that have women as professors. When you get there, form relationships with those women. But expect your female mentors to be hard workers with high expectations for you. Forgive them and negotiate a healthy work-life balance. Lastly, if it gets too hard, ask for help, especially if you decide to have children. And negotiate and plan for a re-entry before you leave. We can build the excitement and wonder for science that I had as a little girl in the 70s, for little girls now. We can nurture ourselves, our friends, and our daughters so that they have the support that they need to have an easier time being a woman in STEM. Thank you.